It's 10 p.m. on a back road in the White Mountains. No streetlights, no other cars. Just Betty and Barney Hill driving home from their honeymoon, and a light in the sky that won't stop following them.
Barney, that is not a plane. It is still following us. And I stop, and I look, and I see it is still out there.
Barney pulls over. He lifts his binoculars. Through the lenses, he sees a craft hovering above the road, and through its windows, figures are staring back at him.
Looking at him with binoculars.
Oh.
His eyes were slanted. I see it. Oh, his eyes were slanted.
He runs to the car screaming. A buzzing sound fills the air, and the next 2 hours of their lives disappear. That was September 19th, 1961. And what happened in those missing hours would become the most convincing UFO case ever documented.
I got to get my gun.
All right. All right, that's all.
The sighting. Betty and Barney Hill were exhausted when they started the drive home on the night of September 19th, 1961. They had spent a few relaxing days traveling through Canada and Vermont, enjoying their first real vacation together. The drive back to Portsmouth, New Hampshire was supposed to be quiet and uneventful. The roads through the White Mountains were dark, empty, and silent. Around 10 p.m. south of Groveton, New Hampshire, Betty noticed a strange bright light in the sky. At first, it didn't seem important. Barney thought it might be a satellite or a small airplane. Betty, who had always been curious about the night sky, kept watching it, but the light didn't behave like either explanation. No matter how far they drove, it stayed near the car. Sometimes it would disappear behind the trees for a moment, and just when they thought it was gone, it returned brighter and closer than before. It was moving with them, keeping pace, as if it was tracking them along the road. There were no other cars on the road, no streetlights, no houses visible through the trees, no sound except the tires on pavement and the low hum of the engine. The deeper they drove into the White Mountains, the more isolated they became, and the more unsettled they felt. Betty was leaning forward in her seat, trying to follow the light through the windshield. Barney was gripping the wheel tighter, saying less and less. Finally, near the area of Twin Mountain, he pulled over. He stepped out of the car with a pair of binoculars, while Betty watched from the passenger seat, her door half open, ready to call him back. What he saw through the lenses terrified him. The object was huge. It was completely silent. It was hovering low above them, descending steadily, shaped unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. It appeared to be a flattened disc-like structure with a band of windows running across its front. And through those windows, Barney claimed he could see figures standing inside, staring directly at him. Not instruments, not cockpit lights, figures, humanoid shapes with large, dark eyes, watching him through the glass as the craft descended. Barney later described the figures as wearing shiny black uniforms. One of them, positioned at the center window, seemed to be directing the others. Barney felt an overwhelming sense that the craft was coming down specifically for them. He tore the binoculars away from his eyes and ran back to the car, screaming to Betty that they were going to be captured. He floored the accelerator. Then came the strangest part. As they sped down the highway, a series of odd buzzing sounds began vibrating through the car. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the trunk, the roof, the frame of the vehicle itself. Their bodies tingled, their minds went foggy, and then everything went blank. The next thing Betty and Barney clearly remembered was hearing the same buzzing sounds again, further down the road. At first, they thought only a few minutes had passed, but they were now 35 miles from where they last remembered driving. When they finally reached home, dawn was breaking. They had lost 2 hours, and neither of them could remember a single thing that had happened during that time. The aftermath. Something was deeply wrong. Both of them felt it the moment they walked through the door. Barney noticed that the toes of his best dress shoes were badly scraped, the leather worn down as if he had been dragged across rough ground for an extended period. He had no memory of damaging them. He had no memory of walking on any surface that could have caused that kind of wear. Betty's dress was torn in several places. The hem was ripped, the zipper was broken, the lining was damaged, and the fabric had a strange, pinkish, powdery residue on it that she couldn't identify. She later had the dress examined, but never received a conclusive explanation for the substance. Both of their watches had stopped working completely. They moved through the house that morning in a kind of daze. Betty didn't want the luggage brought inside the main rooms. She felt uncomfortable touching anything from the trip, as if she was instinctively afraid of contamination, though she couldn't explain why. She placed the suitcases near the back door. Both of them took long showers, scrubbing their skin, trying to wash away a sensation they couldn't name. In the days that followed, Betty noticed something else. The car had a dozen shiny, circular spots on the trunk. When she held a compass near them, the needle spun erratically. Away from the spots, the compass worked normally. She tested it repeatedly. The results were always the same. She never found an explanation. In the weeks after the encounter, Betty became obsessed with finding answers. She contacted the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, one of the most respected UFO research groups at the time, and filed a detailed report. She also filed a separate report with the United States Air Force, worried they might have been exposed to radiation. The Air Force took the report, but never followed up. But the emotional damage was harder to address. Betty began having vivid, disturbing dreams connected to the encounter. Night after night, the same images returned. Strange rooms, medical instruments, large dark eyes watching her from close range. She dreamed of being led down corridors inside a craft, of beings who moved without speaking, of a leader figure who seemed almost kind compared to the others. The dreams were so detailed and so consistent that she began writing them down, filling notebooks with descriptions of scenes she couldn't remember while awake but couldn't escape while asleep. Barney's response was the opposite. He didn't dream. He shut down. He became anxious, withdrawn, and emotionally unreachable. He developed stomach ulcers. He experienced unexplained pain in his lower back and groin. He didn't want to talk about the night, didn't want to think about it, and became visibly distressed any time the subject came up. The experience hung over both of their lives like a shadow neither could escape. They had no answers, only the gap in their memory and the growing certainty that something had been done to them. 2 years later, still unable to move past the fear, they made a decision that would change their lives permanently. They agreed to undergo hypnosis. The hypnosis beginning in 1964, Boston psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon hypnotized Betty and Barney separately over several months. He kept them apart during every session, so neither person could influence the other's memories. What emerged was disturbing, detailed, and remarkably consistent between the two accounts. Under hypnosis, both described the same sequence. After the buzzing sounds, their car stopped. Several gray-skinned beings approached the vehicle. They were short, with large heads, enormous dark eyes, and small, almost absent mouths. Their movements were quick and purposeful. The beings led Betty and Barney up a ramp into a large, silent craft hovering just above the road. Inside, the two were separated and taken to different rooms for examination. Both described being placed on metal tables, while the beings studied them closely. Samples of hair, skin, and nails were taken from their bodies. Small instruments were pressed against their skin. Barney's sessions were the most emotional. He became visibly terrified while speaking under hypnosis, his voice cracking as he described the beings standing over him. At times he squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head away, as if trying to avoid seeing what was in front of him. He said the beings communicated without moving their mouths, as if thoughts were being placed directly into his mind. He described the sensation as invasive and deeply violating. like someone reading every thought he had ever had. Betty's memories were more structured and detailed. She described a series of medical procedures involving instruments she didn't recognize. One moment disturbed her more than anything else. She claimed one of the beings inserted a long needle into her abdomen as part of what they described to her as a pregnancy test. The pain was immediate, sharp, and overwhelming. She cried out. Then the being she believed was the leader placed his hand on her forehead, and the pain vanished instantly, as if it had been switched off. That single detail, the instantaneous removal of pain through touch, has been cited by UFO researchers for decades as one of the most unusual and difficult to explain elements of the entire account. Throughout the experience, Betty said the leader figure treated her differently from the others. He was calmer, more willing to communicate. He seemed curious about her in a way the other beings were not. At one point during a private conversation, she asked him where they had come from. His response would become one of the most famous moments in UFO history. Star map and Zeta Reticuli. According to Betty, the being responded to her question by showing her a three-dimensional map filled with stars connected by solid and broken lines. She had no background in astronomy. She didn't understand what the map represented. But during her hypnosis sessions, she carefully drew what she remembered, a cluster of dots connected by lines that looked like routes between star systems. For years, nobody could identify the pattern. Then, in the late 1960s, an amateur astronomer and Ohio schoolteacher named Marjorie Fish became determined to solve it. Fish believed Betty's drawing might represent a real star system viewed from a specific vantage point outside our solar system. She spent over 6 years studying nearby star catalogs and built a physical three-dimensional model using strings and beads suspended from the ceiling of her apartment to recreate the spatial positions of stars within 55 light-years of Earth. She rotated and adjusted the model obsessively, looking for an angle that matched Betty's drawing. In 1969, Fish claimed she found a match. Betty's map closely resembled the Zeta Reticuli system, a pair of sun-like stars located about 39 light-years away in the southern constellation Reticulum. Both stars in the Zeta Reticuli system are similar to our Sun in age and composition, which makes them plausible candidates for habitable planets. The solid lines on Betty's map appeared to represent primary travel routes between star systems. The broken lines appeared to represent secondary routes. Fish believed Betty had been shown a navigation chart. The finding divided researchers sharply. Supporters argued that Betty, a social worker with no astronomy training, could not have invented an accurate star map from memory. Skeptics countered that the pattern was vague enough to match multiple configurations. Astronomer Carl Sagan argued that the connecting lines were subjective and that different researchers could draw different patterns from the same data. The debate has never been resolved, but the star map remains one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the entire case. Barney's passing. Barney Hill died on February 25, 1969. He was 46 years old, a cerebral hemorrhage, 8 years after the night on the mountain road. In the years between the encounter and his death, Barney never fully recovered. Friends and family noticed the change. He was quieter, more tense. The calm, steady man he had been before that night never entirely came back. He carried the weight of an experience he couldn't prove, couldn't explain, and couldn't forget. The Hills were also an interracial couple in 1961 America, a time when that alone drew suspicion and hostility. Some researchers have suggested that the constant social pressure they already lived under may have amplified the psychological toll of the encounter, layering fear upon fear in ways that were impossible to separate. Some UFO researchers see his early death as connected to the encounter. They argue that the sustained psychological trauma, years of unanswered questions, and the stress of public attention may have contributed to his declining health. There is no medical evidence linking the two events. Doctors described a standard cerebral hemorrhage with no unusual features. But the emotional weight of the timeline is hard to ignore. an ordinary man, a terrifying night, years of silence, anxiety, and physical decline, and then an early death that closed the story without resolving it. Betty continued speaking publicly about the encounter for decades after Barney's death. She became one of the most recognized figures in UFO research, giving interviews, attending conferences, and maintaining her account with absolute consistency until her death in 2004 at the age of 85. She never wavered. She never changed a detail. She never recanted a single word. The Betty and Barney Hill case remains one of the most credible abduction accounts in UFO history. 2 consistent witnesses. Hypnosis conducted by a respected psychiatrist. Physical evidence. A star map that matched a real system. And a gap in time that neither science nor skepticism has fully explained. But the Hills encounter wasn't the last time an object matching their description was seen. Decades later, on the other side of the world, something strikingly similar appeared over Russia. UFO over Russia. Residents in a quiet rural area of Russia reported seeing an unusual object in the evening sky that immediately drew comparisons to the craft Betty and Barney Hill described in 1961. The object appeared suddenly during twilight, when the sky was still bright enough to see clearly, but dark enough for lights to stand out sharply against the background. Witnesses described a dark, disc-shaped form hovering low above the horizon. Beneath it, a cluster of bright lights glowed in a circular pattern, steady and evenly spaced. The shape above the lights had no visible wings, no tail, and no conventional aircraft structure. It looked solid, structured, and completely silent. The object did not behave like a helicopter or airplane. It hovered motionless for several minutes, then shifted position laterally without banking or turning, and faded from view. No sonic boom, no engine sound, no contrail. Witnesses said the event lasted only a few minutes, but the silence and precision left everyone who saw it deeply unsettled. No aviation authority confirmed unusual air activity in the area. The object remains officially unidentified. But for researchers who have studied the Hill case, the similarities are difficult to dismiss. A disc-shaped craft, circular lights, silent hovering, low altitude, and no explanation from anyone in a position to provide one. The Hills saw something like this in 1961 and spent the rest of their lives trying to make people believe them. 65 years later, people on the other side of the planet are filming the same type of object with smartphones, and the response from governments remains exactly what it was in 1961. Silence. Until now. The Pentagon stops denying. In May 2026, the Pentagon did something it had never done before. It opened a public website and began releasing over 100 previously classified UAP files, including videos, photographs, and original source documents from across the entire United States government. No security clearance required, no redaction barriers, just raw, unfiltered files uploaded to war.gov/UFO, available to anyone with an internet connection. After 60 years of denial, dismissal, and silence, the government was inviting the public to look at its own evidence. The program was called Pursue, the Presidential Unsealings and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder announced the release at a press briefing, stating that the department was committed to transparency with the American public. He emphasized that while past administrations had sought to discredit or dissuade public interest, this release represented a new approach. The files included never-before-seen infrared footage captured by military platforms, some dating back decades, alongside hundreds of first-person accounts from service members and civilians stretching as far back as the 1940s. Among the released materials were military videos from U.S. Central Command showing unidentified objects performing maneuvers that defied known physics. One 2023 video showed a UAP flying near the ocean surface, making multiple 90-degree turns at approximately 80 miles per hour. a feat no known aircraft can perform. Another from 2013 captured what analysts described as an 8-pointed star-shaped object moving across an infrared sensor with a visible trail behind it. A 2024 video showed a misshapen ball of white light with a glowing halo effect, filmed from a military platform with no identification achieved. None of these objects were identified. None matched known aircraft from any nation. The historical files were equally remarkable. Reports from civilians dating back to the 1940s were now publicly available. A 1947 account from a farmer near Stockton, California, described a wobbling object hovering over his house while his chickens panicked and rushed into the henhouse. Commercial airline pilots had filed reports of golden cylinders passing their aircraft at altitude. Decades of reports that had been quietly filed away were now open for the world to examine. Perhaps the most striking item was a NASA photograph from the Apollo 17 mission, taken in December 1972. The image contained 3 dots in a triangular formation visible in the lunar sky. The photograph had been publicly available for decades, but new preliminary government analysis now concluded the feature was potentially the result of a physical object in the scene. The original Apollo 17 film was obtained for further investigation. Betty and Barney Hill never lived to see this moment, but what they described in 1961, an encounter with beings that defied every explanation, is now part of a growing body of evidence that the government has confirmed it cannot explain. The files are open. The footage is real, and the question the Hills asked 60 years ago is the same question the Pentagon is asking now. What are these things? The story of Betty and Barney Hill remains one of the most convincing UFO encounters ever documented. And now, with the Pentagon releasing footage it hid for decades, their story feels less like a mystery and more like the beginning of an answer. What do you think happened to the Hills that night? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.